Have you ever played something a note, a melody, and felt like it didn't just echo off the walls but stirred something awake? Because I did. 11 years I spent playing hymns, filling St. Luke's Chapel with music that was meant to comfort the grieving, uplift the faithful, honor the divine. But on one cold October evening, I struck a chord I had played hundreds of times before, and something else responded. Not the congregation, not God. Something that should not have been listening. I remember the way the air shifted, not like a draft, but like the breath of something massive, ancient, wrong. And when I looked up from the keys, I swear to you the space behind the altar wasn't empty anymore. There was something standing there, watching me. It wasn't shaped like a man, and it wasn't there the moment before. It didn't move, it didn't speak, but its presence hit me like a blast of ice water. And then it smiled, not with a mouth, but with its silence. And I knew I had opened a door I was never meant to touch. You may not believe me. Honestly, I wouldn't believe me either if I hadn't lived through it. But I can't unsee what I saw. I can't unhear what I heard. And if I stop telling the story, I think it'll come back. It wants to be remembered. My name is Malcolm Reyes. I was the principal organist at St. Luke's Episcopal Chapel in Ashcroft, Pennsylvania, for just over 11 years. Not exactly a glamorous role, but it was a quiet kind of honorable work. Sundays, weddings, funerals, the occasional evening recital. I wasn't famous, but I was respected. In that sanctuary, I was the voice behind the music, and the music was the soul of the place. St. Luke's wasn't one of those towering Gothic cathedrals you see in documentaries. It was modest, quaint even, but it had a presence. Built in 1879, it sat on a gentle hill surrounded by sycamores, the old stones worn smooth by wind and time. Inside, it smelled of waxed oak, lingering incense, and something deeper, a kind of old dust, like forgotten books and whispered prayers soaked into the rafter. The stained glass windows always gave the sanctuary a dreamlike glow, especially in the afternoons when the sun hit just right. Blue, gold, and crimson light streamed down like melted glass, dappling the pews and altar in a shifting mosaic that felt more sacred than anything I'd ever read in scripture. The pipe organ sat in the loft, high above the nave, a crown of polished wood and bronze pipes that rose like teeth into the arched ceiling. That organ was my world. Every pedal, every stop, every breath of sound that machine gave, I knew it like my own hand. When I played, it didn't feel like pressing keys. It felt like channeling something through the walls. And the people, they were old ladies who brought cookies after Mass, children who waved shyly from the first pew, the priest, Father Benton, steady, soft-spoken, the kind of man who would stay late just to walk someone to their car. There was warmth in that place, community, a rhythm. Most nights I'd stay late to practice. I liked the solitude, the echo, the way the church emptied of people but still felt alive. There was something oddly comforting about playing hymns into the silence, like the music was speaking to something deeper than faith. But all of that changed on the night I chose to play Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. After the doors were locked, I had played that hymn 100 times, but that night, something answered. The thing about routine is that it blinds you to the strength. For years my life followed a comforting rhythm. Morning services on Sundays, evening rehearsals on Thursdays, funerals as they came, always solemn, always measured. I had a key to the chapel and permission to practice whenever I liked. No one questioned me when I stayed until 10 or 11, especially in the fall when we prepared special pieces for All Saints' Day and Advent. That evening started no differently. It was a Friday, crisp with the early bite of October air, and the church was empty by Father Benton had left early. He wasn't feeling well, said he had a chill he couldn't shake. I waved him off, joking that the organ would keep me company. He smiled, but didn't laugh. By 7, I was alone. I remember the exact way the light looked filtering through the stained glass. The reds and purples had faded, and the sanctuary was settling into that blue-toned twilight that only churches seem to hold on to. Like dusk arrived slower inside those walls. I lit a single oil lamp by the loft entrance and climbed the narrow staircase to the organ. I always started the same way: scales, a few bars of Bach, something slow to warm up the fingers. Then I moved to the hymnal. "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing" was one of my go-tos. There's something in the way it builds, soft and slow, then lifts with that hopeful lilt. It never failed to center me. That night, I played it through once, then again. I was working on a new variation, improvising around the melody, letting the notes lead me. I didn't feel anything strange at first. In fact, the calm was deeper than usual, the kind that makes you forget the time, forget yourself. I remember pausing between verses and realizing I hadn't looked at my watch in over an hour. I smiled, told myself I was just in the zone, but then came the first detail I ignored: a soft sound, like footsteps, slow and deliberate, on the floorboards below the loft. I didn't stop playing. Churches settle, I told myself. Old buildings creak. It was nothing new. And when the lamp flickered behind me, I didn't look, just adjusted the stops and kept playing. The pipes sang. The music filled the rafters. I was alone. Or, I thought I was. It wasn't until the following morning that I started to question what had happened the night before. At the time, I brushed off the strange noises, the lamp flickering, even the slight change in temperature up in the loft, chalked it up to the weather, to drafty wood and imagination. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. When I arrived early Saturday afternoon to rehearse again, I found the chapel doors already unlocked. At first I assumed Father Benton was inside. He often stopped by to pray or prepare his sermon. But when I stepped in, the chapel was empty, completely. No candles lit, no footsteps, just silence. Thick, oppressive silence that seemed to press against my ears the moment I crossed the threshold. And on the pulpit, there was something waiting. A single piece of sheet music, not in my handwriting, not from any hymnal I recognized. It was a melody, simple, almost childlike, scrawled in faded ink on parchment that looked decades old. The title at the top simply read, "To Him Who Listens Beneath." I thought it was some obscure folk hymn at first, maybe something from the early Anglican tradition, or one of those old Protestant revivals. I took it up to the loft with me, curious. I placed it on the organ and played the first few bars. They were dissonant, unsettling, not outwardly scary, but wrong in the way that certain paintings feel wrong. Faces just slightly too symmetrical, eyes that follow you no matter where you stand. The harmonies shifted in ways no sacred music should, chords that didn't resolve, intervals that grated against my training. But I couldn't stop. I played through it once, then again, and with each repetition I swear the room felt colder. The echo from the pipes didn't bounce like normal. It hung in the air, suspended, like the sound refused to die. That night, I stayed late again, and that's when I began to dig. I searched through the old sheet music archives in the vestry, hoping to find the origin of the melody. I even checked the diocesan registry. Nothing. No record of "To Him Who Listens Beneath." I asked Father Benton the next morning if he'd left anything on the pulpit. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. "I haven't been inside since Friday," he said. "You locked up, didn't you?" I had. I was sure of it. So who or what had opened the doors? And more importantly, who left that music behind? By the following week, the tension in the church had shifted from something I imagined to something I could feel: visceral, heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I tried to resume normal rehearsals, but every time I returned to the organ loft, I found things altered. Once I arrived to find the bench slightly pulled back from the keys, as if someone else had been sitting there. I thought maybe I'd forgotten to push it in the night before, but that didn't explain the smell: something faint, metallic, wet. Not blood, exactly. More like rust. damp iron. The sheet music "To Him Who Listens Beneath" was still on the stand. No matter how many times I filed it away. I moved it twice, once into the filing cabinet in the vestry, once into a locked drawer in the loft. Both times I returned the next evening to find it back on the organ, waiting for me. The paper never looked dusty. In fact, it seemed fresher each time, less brittle, less yellowed. And then the cold spots started. It began in the stairwell leading to the loft. One evening I paused mid-step because I could see my breath in front of me. Though the rest of the church was warm, it was a distinct patch of air, ice cold and unmoving, like stepping through a freezer door. The sensation passed the moment I entered the loft, but it left a dampness on my skin as if I'd walked through fog that had touched me. But the worst part, the thing that still turns my stomach to remember, was the sound. I was playing one of the Advent pieces, something I knew by heart, when the organ stuttered. Not mechanically, not like a pipe misfiring or a wind delay. This was different. The notes I was pressing down began repeating themselves, warping slightly, like a recording skipping in real time. The harmonics bent into something lower, darker. And beneath that, beneath the music, I heard something else. It wasn't a voice exactly, not in the way we speak, but it was language, something forming just behind the vibration of the notes, buried in the resonance of the pipes. A cadence. I stopped playing. Instantly, my hands froze midair. The sound cut out, but the cold remained, and something watched. It happened 3 nights later. I'd convinced myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was just overtired or letting too many ghost stories settle into my bones. I even considered taking time off, maybe visiting my sister out in Connecticut. But deep down, I knew, if I left I might never come back, and some part of me wasn't ready to abandon that organ, that chapel, that song. That night I gave in. I played it again, "To Him Who Listens Beneath," telling myself I was analyzing it, trying to figure out what made it so disturbing. I had scribbled down annotations, attempting to decode the dissonance, make sense of the key modulations, but once my hands were on the keys, everything else vanished. The organ didn't sound like it had before. It sounded alive. The pipes responded with a strange elasticity, each note pulsing with a vibration I could feel through the bench and floorboards. The air grew denser, harder to breathe, and the lights dimmed, not flickered, but dimmed in sequence with the notes I played, as if the building itself was responding to the music. Then came the knock, not from the front door, not from the walls, from inside the organ. 3 slow thuds like fists pounding from within the wood and brass. I jumped back from the keys, heart pounding so loud I could hear it echoing in my head. But the sound didn't stop. The knocks continued, then changed, becoming a rhythm, a pattern, like Morse code. I recognized it from my college days studying music theory. It wasn't random, it was notation. I grabbed my notebook and transcribed what I could remember, matching the tempo of the knocks to basic rhythmic values. It formed a bar of music, a fragment, and when I played that sequence on the lower register, the organ shuddered, visibly. The pipes quivered as if something had passed through them, and then it appeared. At first just a shadow at the base of the nave. I thought it was a trick of the dim light, but it moved slowly, unnaturally, like smoke crawling backward across the floor. It didn't walk, it unfolded, taller than any man I'd ever seen, limbs too long, bending wrong. Its shape was impossible. It stood just beyond the reach of the altar candle, and then it tilted its head toward me. That's when I understood. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't stress. It wasn't madness. It was an invitation, and I had accepted it the moment I played that hymn. I didn't sleep that night. I could. Instead, I sat in the vestry, lights on, door locked, staring at the sheet music I had copied from those rhythmic knocks. My hands were trembling too hard to hold a pen steady. Every few minutes I'd glance toward the sanctuary, half expecting to see that thing still standing there. But it was gone, or at least, hidden again. By morning I decided to tell someone. I didn't go to the police. I knew what this would sound like. I needed someone who understood the church, the building, the layers of time it had soaked in. So I went to Father Ben. He looked older than he had the week before. His voice was thin, and when I brought up the melody, his reaction wasn't confusion. It was fear. He didn't even ask what the title was. He just said, "You played it, didn't you?" I felt my stomach drop. "You know about it," I asked. He hesitated, then pulled a drawer from his desk and removed an old dust-covered binder. Inside were scanned copies of parish records, handwritten notes from a priest who had served before Benton, Father Oric. Back in the night, tucked between yellowed pages was a single line that caught my breath. Hymns N3-4 suppressed, never to be used, lock loft if found again. Next to it, circled in red, were the words, "It listens when played." Father Benton told me there were stories, rumors passed between priests for decades. A melody that appeared every few generations, never written by the same hand but always the same tune. They said it was older than the church, older than the land, that it came back when someone was ready. Ready for what? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me a box from the back of his cabinet. Inside were newspaper clippings, fragile and browned with age. One was from 1924. Local organist found dead in loft. Hands burned black. Another from 1888. Service interrupted by collapse. Witnesses report shadow behind altar. I couldn't stop. It wasn't compulsion. It was necessity, like something was unfinished, waiting to be completed. I started researching anything I could find. Apocryphal text, forbidden liturgical hymns, religious folklore about music that could summon. Most of it was noise, but then I stumbled on something buried in a musicology journal from 1911, hidden within a footnote on religious tonal systems. It referenced a hymn of descent described only in whispers, not of angelic choirs but of music written to call down, to invite upward but not heavenward. It described tonal clusters that, when performed in sequence, didn't evoke joy or sorrow but recognition, a kind of spiritual beacon. The theory proposed it originated in pre-Christian rituals, adapted into early church music before being intentionally scrubbed from all hymnals. Not because it was heretical, but because it worked. That same week I returned to the loft. I told myself it was for closure, but the truth is I wanted to see it again. I played the melody, and something answered, not just in presence, in sound. The organ responded to tones I never touched, chords filling in beneath my fingers, harmonies swelling that my feet hadn't triggered. The pipes breathed as if with a second will. Then halfway through the sequence I heard a voice, not loud, not human. It didn't speak in language. It was sound, shaped like meaning, pressed into my skull like heat behind the eyes. And in that moment, I understood. This thing, whatever it was, had been brought into our world again and again, lured by those who found the hymn, those whose fingers stumbled upon its rhythm like a lock turned by accident. And every time it appeared, something was taken. A life, a soul, a sliver of something deeper than death. It wasn't random. It was a bargain, one no one realized they were making. And I had just signed my name with a melody. After that night, I stopped being a musician, in the traditional sense. I didn't care about perfect intervals or seasonal compositions. My obsession became avoidance. Not just avoiding the hymn, but avoiding music altogether. I couldn't touch the keys without feeling watched. I couldn't walk into the sanctuary without hearing the faintest hum of that cursed melody weaving itself through the air like a parasite hunting its host. I told Father Benton I needed to step back, take leave. He didn't argue. He didn't even ask why. He just nodded, almost relieved, as if he'd been waiting for the moment I'd realize what he already knew. But I couldn't stay away entirely. Something about that song still pulled at me, not to play it, but to understand it. I combed through old diocesan logs, not for more stories, those were already burned into my memory, but for gaps, times when organists suddenly left their posts, or churches inexplicably replaced their instruments. I found dozens across the decades, some burned down, some shuddered. In many, the organist had no obituary, just disappeared. It wasn't coincidence. It was containment. They thought destroying the instrument would silence the hymn, that sealing the doors would hold whatever was listening, but it never stopped the melody from finding someone else. Someone curious, someone alone, someone attuned. I wasn't special, just unlucky enough to recognize the shape of the thing hiding in the music. And yet, even through the fear, I felt awakened, as if I'd glimpsed something raw and old and completely true. I began to see echoes of it in other hymns, reverent passages with subtle deviations, strange phrasing that mimicked the forbidden chords. I found them in different churches, different centuries, different languages. It had been hiding in plain sight, and now that I knew, I could hear it everywhere. The problem was, the more I listened, the less I wanted to forget. I haven't played a single note in almost 2 years. I left St. Luke's. Officially, I resigned for health reasons. Unofficially, I just couldn't sit at that bench anymore without feeling like I was being watched from the pipes themselves. The church found another organist eventually, a younger man, full of talent and spirit. I tried to warn him once, briefly, without saying too much. Just told him if he ever found a piece he didn't recognize, something off key, something that felt wrong, he should burn it without playing a single note. He laughed. They always laugh in the beginning. Here's what I've come to believe, and I don't say this lightly. There are things older than faith, older than scripture, older than the idea that music should be beautiful or worshipful or safe. Sound is shape. Sound is invitation. And sometimes a song is not written to praise, but to summon. I think something lives in the space between sound and silence. Something that waits, listens, and responds only to those who play without knowing what they've unlocked. And once it hears you, it never really forgets. So I ask you now, have you ever sat alone in a room and heard a song you didn't recognize, one that seemed to rise from the walls themselves? Have you ever played something by instinct, not memory, and felt your fingers guided by something that wasn't yours? If that ever happens, stop playing, because not every melody was meant to be heard, and some songs play you. I live quietly now, a small apartment far from Ashcroft, no piano, no instruments, not even a music box. Sometimes the silence feels oppressive, like I've torn out a piece of myself and left it behind in that loft, but I'd rather live with the ache of absence than risk letting that melody back in, because I know the truth now. There's no exercising a song once it finds you, no prayer, no blessing, no ritual strong enough to erase what it carves into your soul. That hymn to him who listens beneath wasn't just music, it was a door, and I played the key. Whatever I let through, I think it's still waiting, not in some hellish realm, not in fire or shadow, but in the very places we're told to feel safe, the sanctuaries, the lofts, the hidden corners of churches where echoes cling to stone. It doesn't want devotion, it wants recognition. It wants the attention of those who think they're playing to God when really they're feeding something else. And now that I've heard it, I can't unhear it. I sometimes wonder, what if someone else finds it next? Someone younger, older, hungry for mystery. Maybe they'll see the old pages, maybe they'll feel the same pull, maybe they already have. Because these things don't disappear, they wait, they bide their time. So if you ever walk past a chapel and hear a song that makes the hairs on your neck rise, that draws you in despite yourself, don't go inside. And if you do, don't follow the music. Because I did. I followed it all the way to the end. And now, when the wind hums through my vents at night, and I feel the floorboards creak like steps just beyond my door, I don't ask who it is. I already know. It listens. Still. And I think it's waiting for the next verse, because the song never ends. Not real.